What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Free Mind Podcast. This is Dave Hurt, your host, and I am happy that you're here. Feeling a lot better today. You guys probably noticed in yesterday's episode, I was nasally, feeling under the weather, whatever you want to call it. So I'm happy to be back. I'm happy to be feeling good. And man, we got a lot of stuff to cover today. So first off, I wanted to say, you'll notice if you're watching the video that I'm drinking this odd looking liquid. This is my first Phorm Megawatt pre-workout. I'm drinking it right now because after I record this episode, I am going to be hitting the gym and smashing the weights. So if you're interested in an effective pre-workout or any of First Phorm's products, check out firstphorm.com/hurt, H-U-R-T, my last name, and you can get any of their products shipped for free when you order using that link. Also, you'll notice on this bottle, if you're watching the video, OG for the office gym. That is where my studio is based out of. I bring that up because we are having an event this Saturday. I'm recording this on Thursday, February 3rd. We're having an event this Saturday here at the office gym where we have an open gym event. The public is welcome to come. I am going to be set up at the event with a table, 2 microphones, 2 chairs, and anybody is welcome to come and sit down and have a conversation with me about any issues that you want to talk about. So I'm really excited about that. First time I'll be doing that. That's going to be here at the office gym on Saturday. What is that? February the 5th? February the 5th. So come and find me. I think it's running from like 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. if you're in the area here of Lake Wiley, South Carolina. Come and find us here at the office gym. Jump on the microphone and talk about whatever you want to talk about. All right, guys, before we kick this off, I'm going to do an impression. And if you're watching the video, I want you to try and guess who I am. Okay, here we go. Any guesses? Any guesses, anybody? Hey, maybe if you're even listening to the audio version, you might have a good guess there. Okay. Give up? That was an impression of Eric Garcetti, the mayor of Los Angeles. And you might ask, why is that an impression of Eric Garcetti, the mayor of Los Angeles? Well, because he recently took a picture with Magic Johnson, as you all know, probably an immunocompromised individual. And Mr. Garcetti took off his mask for that picture. When folks asked him about that, his response was that he held his breath.
I wore my mask the entire game, and when people ask for a photograph, I hold my breath and I put it here, and people could see that. There's a 0% chance of infection from that.
I kid you not, that is what the man said, that he takes pictures with people without a mask, and he holds his breath when he does so. So it's okay. Rules for thee, not for me, everybody. Welcome to the world we live in. If you haven't seen that, check it out, look it up. It is mind-blowing, okay? These people are mind-blowing. Next thing I want to talk about really quick. I don't know about you guys, but when I was young, I went to Golden Corral quite often. And when I say quite often, I mean like a couple times a year because we were poor as bleep. And that was like going out to eat for us. And that was a big deal. Also, we did this program at my high school where if you got straight A's or A's and B's or whatever, you got to go to Golden Corral for lunch, and it was on the school, and they paid for your lunch. And so I always made sure I got that. But that is not why I brought up Golden Corral, ladies and gentlemen. So just recently, I believe it was, let's see here, I think it's Ben Salem or Ben Salem Township at a Golden Corral. Now, is that somewhere in Pennsylvania or something like that? I'm not sure. But anyway, there was a fight that broke out due to a lack of steak. All right. I am not kidding. This is not an exaggeration. Welcome to the year 2022 and the scarcity of the world we live in right now. A fight broke out, like a melee fight. Like people were hitting each other with chairs, high chairs. Stuff was flying everywhere. People were cursing. They were probably throwing kids. Who knows? It got wild, but it was because they had a lack of steak at this Golden Corral. So I'm going to roll this video really quick, And if you're watching on YouTube, you'll see it. If you're not watching on YouTube, maybe you should consider subscribing on YouTube, because I'm really trying out here, guys, and YouTube ain't showing my videos to anybody. Anyway, let's roll this, and you can, I don't know what I'm going to say here. You can enjoy this beautiful melee.
A piece of steak turns into this huge brawl involving 40 people at a Golden Corral in Pennsylvania. This cell phone video shows punches being thrown, chairs being tossed around. Witnesses say the mayhem began when a man got upset because the person in line behind him got his steak first. The kitchen staff tried to explain why one steak can take longer to cook than another. The man didn't get it, and this was the result. Fortunately, the restaurant says everybody walked away with just cuts and bruises.
All right, that's enough. So I don't even know what else to say about that. It's pretty incredible. It's pretty phenomenal. I mean, goodness gracious. Actually, I have a Golden Corral story. I'll share it with you guys really quick. So I mentioned that we used to go to Golden Corral during honor roll, or for honor roll, like if you got all A's or A's and B's. And it was funny because this is how it was actually pretty beautiful. It was a true meritocracy. So this is what my high school did. So if you got all A's, you got the full buffet at Golden Corral. If you got A's and B's, you got a cheeseburger. But you still got to go, but you only got a cheeseburger. So I always tried to get the buffet because I ain't no scrub. But it was a pretty cool system. I don't know if schools still do stuff like that now. It was definitely like true meritocracy. You earn the buffet, or you get a cheeseburger, or you don't even get to go. Anyway, I was at Golden Corral on one of these trips for the honor roll, and there were waitresses going back and forth. So every time we would get there would be like 50 kids, a bunch of kids. We had a whole area reserved for ourselves. And they're rushing all around getting our drinks and getting people's cheeseburgers for the people who got cheeseburgers. And they'd carry these huge circular trays with a bunch of plates on them. And God bless her, this lady was going at a full speed clip. And I went to get up from my table to go to the buffet because I'm a straight A student. And I stuck my leg out to get up from the table and tripped this poor lady. And I shit you not, she probably had 10 plates of cheeseburgers on her tray. She went flying. The cheeseburgers went flying everywhere. She just like face planted. And this is Golden Corral, so it's a classy joint. So it has carpeted floors. Face planted, like carpet burn across her face. Cheeseburgers everywhere. I had never heard that place get so quiet so fast. It just like a pin. If there weren't carpet floors, you would hear a pin drop in that joint. And it was like out of a movie. It was just completely silent, and then an uproar of laughter. And I felt horrible. I was super embarrassed. So, lady from Golden Corral, from back in probably 2003, 2004, if you happen to be watching this and you remember that, I am sorry. I apologized to you then, but I would also like to apologize to you now, since we're talking about Golden Corral. Anyway, that happened at this Golden Corral. Absolutely insane. Crazy world we live in. But you know what? Nothing surprises you anymore either. It's like, okay, there was a melee at Golden Corral because they ran out of steak. Pretty funny. Ha. Go on about your life. People will forget this in a week. This is the world we live in. Oh boy. Also, it is Black History Month. Today is February 3rd. February is Black History Month. And I've heard some mixed not reviews, but mixed opinions on this from my black friends. Some of my black friends actually don't think we should have a Black History Month because they basically say that Black history is important all the time. Why relegate it to a month?
Black History Month you find
ridiculous.
Why?
You're going to relegate my history to a month?
Oh, come on.
What do you do with yours? Which month is White History Month? Well, come on, tell me.
Well, I'm Jewish.
Okay, which month is Jewish History Month?
There isn't one.
Oh, why not?
Yeah.
Do you want one?
No.
I don't either. I don't want a Black History Month. Black history is American history.
How are we going to get rid of racism?
Stop talking about it. I'm going to stop calling you a white man.
Yeah.
And I'm going to ask you to stop calling me a black man. I know you as Mike Wallace. You know me as Morgan Freeman.
And I understand that perspective, but then I also understand the perspective of people who want to have a month to truly celebrate Black History. And that doesn't mean you can't celebrate it year round. But anyway, it's Black History Month. And let me tell you something. Tom Brady had the nerve on the first day of Black History Month to announce his retirement from the NFL. Can you guys believe that? Obviously, I'm kidding. Like, that's not a big deal at all. Who cares? But, in fact, Twitter cares. So, folks were actually mad about the fact that Tom Brady decided to retire and announce his retirement on the first day of Black History Month because they said it took away from the gravity of Black History Month. Again, this is the world we live in. Craziness. Of course, he doesn't take away from Black History Month for announcing his retirement. He probably waited until after the weekend when there were no more NFL games going on, so he didn't take away from that. People will always find a way to get offended, and it's not even shocking anymore. It's not even surprising, but that happened. So welcome to America in 2022. Okay, we got a lot to get into. These few things that I've discussed already weren't even the main topics that I had written down here. These were just things that I wanted to talk about off the top of my head based on some stuff happening in the world. It's been a long time since we did a solo episode besides the one that I did yesterday where I was just giving you guys an update. So a lot has happened. There's no way I can cover everything that has happened. It's just been insane. It's like every day there's a completely new, groundbreaking, ground-shaking, earth-shattering headline of some sort. But what's been in the news lately and what's been a big deal has been this all-out attack and assault on Joe Rogan. And you guys can probably guess, based on the fact that I do a long-form podcast where I interview guests, that I'm a fan of Joe Rogan and I love what he does. I've thought about this a lot, and I think it's going to be impossible to get all of my thoughts out on this, but my general feeling is that Joe Rogan has tapped into something that all of us were craving and that we were missing and that we are not getting from the mainstream legacy media. Okay, that is long form, authentic discourse. For those of you who aren't familiar with who Joe Rogan is, which I shouldn't assume that you are, I think most people are for the most part, and a lot of people who listen to me have probably listened to some of his shows. But Joe Rogan is originally known for, well, several things. Mixed martial arts commentator, right? He's been with the UFC as a commentator forever. But before that, he was a stand-up comedian, and a very successful stand-up comedian who's toured all over, done specials on Netflix. And then, of course, he was the Fear Factor host, right? And he started this podcast back in, I think, like 2009 that was literally just him and his friends hanging out, shooting the shit, usually getting drunk and high, and just talking to fans. That was it. That's all it was. It was like a hang with his comedian friends. And Joe has never professed to be news or a journalist or an expert or anything like that. In fact, he prefaces most stuff that he puts out there with, don't listen to me, I'm just a cage fighting commentator who does stand-up comedy, right? But nonetheless, because his genuine, authentic way of having a conversation where he can admit when he's wrong, and he talks to multiple sides of the argument in terms of folks who represent ideas on multiple sides of an argument, his audience has grown massive on his podcast, The Joe Rogan Experience. If you haven't listened to any episodes of his podcast, I highly encourage you to. You can find them on Spotify exclusively now. And this is part of the reason we have this big issue ongoing. So Joe has on all kinds of guests, ranging from politicians to scientists to stand-up comedians to just random cool people who have written books that Joe's interested in. I mean, you name it. The entire spectrum of humanity is represented on that show for the most part. And that's what makes it amazing. and you can pick and choose which episodes you listen to. He has on folks like Alex Jones and Elon Musk. Those tend to be the super popular ones because these are enigmatic characters that everyone's interested in. But then he also has on like Dr. Rhonda Patrick, who is an incredibly knowledgeable, talented scientist who talks about molecular physiology and adaptive biochemistry and all kinds of really cool stuff that I nerd out on. And Andrew Huberman, for example, who's another scientist he has on the show. So Joe is someone who is just naturally inquisitive and curious about the world, and he's not afraid to ask questions. He never tries to put on a front like he knows everything. And so he lets his guard down and he asks people good questions about what their expertise is on and what they do in life. And this is why we enjoy it. And he does it for 3-4 hours at a time. Then also he'll have on his stand-up comedian friends, and it can turn into an absolute shit show. But it's like the raw, authentic nature of life as we know it and as we live it and as we experience it. That's why we love it. And it is the polar opposite of CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, all of these news outlets where you get someone on for like a minute to 2 minutes giving a soundbite that's scripted based on their corporate sponsors about an issue that you're supposed to believe is an authentic message. It's not. And the people know that. And so we've been given a spoon feeding for the past couple years on the C word that I'm not allowed to say on YouTube probably still, but COVID-19. Okay. And Joe has had on very qualified doctors and scientists who give not even an alternative perspective, but just talk about things like treatments for COVID-19, because the narrative coming from the corporate media and our government here in America hasn't even focused on treatment. It's just been get vaccinated and that's it. But the problem, of course, is that folks get vaccinated and still catch COVID. So then what? You just hang out and wait, try to shake it off? No, there are treatments that you can undergo to mitigate the effects of the virus even more, even if you're vaccinated. And so he's had on people who have talked about early treatment and different methods and all kinds of things. And yes, talked about the vaccine, the mechanism by which it operates, the different side effects that can arise from it. And this is just natural conversation that you should have when it comes to any pharmaceuticals and any drugs. But anytime big money is involved, and you guys have probably all seen these clips where it's like brought to you by Pfizer, brought to you by Pfizer, brought to you by Pfizer for like every news program out there on every network.
Good Morning America is brought to you by Pfizer.
CBS Health Watch sponsored by Pfizer.
Anderson Cooper 360. Brought to you by Pfizer.
ABC News Nightline. Brought to you by Pfizer.
Making a difference. Brought to you by Pfizer.
CNN Tonight. Brought to you by Pfizer. Early Start. Brought to you by Pfizer. Friday night on Aaron Burnett Out Front. Brought to you by Pfizer.
This Week with George Stephanopoulos is brought to you by Pfizer.
This weather report brought to you by Pfizer.
Today's countdown to the royal wedding is brought to you by Pfizer.
And now a CBS Sports Update brought to you by Pfizer.
Meet the Press Data Download brought to you by Pfizer.
This portion of CBS This Morning sponsored by Pfizer.
On how to find the hidden sugars in the American family diet. Sponsored by Pfizer.
Pfizer is paying these guys. So, of course, they're going to come after Rogan. Anything that paints Pfizer or Big Pharma in a negative light, they're going to attack. And it's so transparent. It's so blatantly obvious. CNN has been one of the worst, attacking him over taking ivermectin, which is, of course, an anti-parasitic drug that does have antiviral properties, that the Nobel Prize for Physiology and Medicine was won in, I believe, 2015 for in humans, that also happens to have a veterinary application. So, of course, they skew the argument or skew the headlines saying that Joe Rogan is taking horse paste, which is just completely asinine, ridiculous. He was prescribed it by his doctor to manage his symptoms of COVID-19. So they've just been attacking this guy relentlessly, right? And you guys probably know about most of this. But recently, You may not have even heard of him. And I'll be honest, I knew who he was, but I was not intimately familiar with his music. Neil Young came out and said, basically, and he did it in an open letter format that he like put out and then quickly deleted. He said that Spotify either has to get rid of Joe Rogan or get rid of Neil Young. It's one or the other because of the, quote, misinformation that Joe Rogan puts out. First off, Joe Rogan doesn't really put out any information. He has guests on his show. Secondly, of course, Neil Young did not say specifically what any misinformation was that Joe Rogan, quote, put out. He just used the nebulous term, the nebulous talking point that the legacy mainstream media likes to throw around, and didn't give any details. Now, Spotify, of course, was like, okay, well, see you later, and removed his music because Joe Rogan, Sagar Anjetti, I think, put it the best on Breaking Points. He said, Spotify needs Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan doesn't need Spotify. And that is true. So, of course, Spotify said, well, we're keeping Rogan. He brought us God knows how many subscribers and podcast listeners. So see you later, Neil Young. And then there have been other artists from like back in the day, back in the 70s or whatever, who have said they're pulling their music. Essentially, boomer musicians are pulling their music from Spotify because of, quote, misinformation on the Joe Rogan Experience. He's also been attacked by this podcaster, YouTuber guy, Ethan, I forget his last name, essentially attacking Rogan for the way he looks, which is really odd because this Ethan guy is quite, I hate even talking about people's, appearances, but he's a fat guy. He's out of shape, and Joe Rogan is clearly not. And Joe's also in his 50s. This Ethan guy is a good bit younger, and he's attacking Joe Rogan for being unhealthy, which is just preposterous. Like, it's an all-out assault on this guy. And meanwhile, a lot of it stems from the fact that they realize Joe has essentially more listeners / viewers for his one show than all of them combined. And I'm talking the networks, everyone. I think it was something like Joe has 11 million unique listeners when a new episode drops. And I don't know the time frame for that, but by comparison, CNN network-wide doesn't even have 1 million each day. And that's on across all their shows, right? Network-wide. So that's the scale difference here. I mean, orders of magnitude. Joe Rogan is massive. And by the way, people trust him and come to him to listen to him for information because the mainstream media has built so much distrust in the people, not because Joe is trying to be some conveyor of truth, right? He's not saying, listen to me and what I have to say and nothing else. In fact, again, he's just having conversations, chopping it up, asking questions about things he's curious in. And it just so happens that we, the people, are like, this is way better than the crap that they're trying to feed us over at these other networks where they very clearly have an agenda and it's driven by corporate greed. But for whatever reason, they can't get through their heads, and instead they're trying to cancel Joe Rogan, and it keeps firing back in their face. So Spotify has conceded, I guess, that they will put like COVID warnings on episodes where he talks about COVID. Now, that's, of course, not a big deal. I mean, it's essentially saying, hey, they talk about COVID in this episode, but still, it is something that Spotify is doing in response. But we haven't seen the end of this, ladies and gentlemen. They're going to keep attacking Joe Rogan, but he is Dave Chappelle scale, if not larger, right? He's the biggest of the big. He is the largest podcast in the world, and they can't cancel him. They can't take him off the air. Even if Spotify got rid of him and threw out his contract, which I doubt they would because I'm pretty sure he gets paid no matter what, he could just go open his own app somewhere where it just streams the Joe Rogan Experience, and everybody would leave Spotify that went to Spotify just to listen to Joe. People are going to go where Joe goes. He's built this thing over a decade, right? So that's been going on. It's a mess. It's always, by the way, always people, for the most part, that I see commenting and talking about Joe negatively, calling him things like alt-right, which is hilarious because he's had on Bernie Sanders, he had on Sanjay Gupta from CNN, he's had on Tulsi Gabbard, Andrew Yang. Joe supports universal basic income in some capacity, and he supported Bernie Sanders. And like, this guy is not alt-right. He is not far right. It's just because he's a whatever athletic dude with tattoos who believes in the Second Amendment, and so he is the devil. But he is far from alt-right. So, but they try to demonize him. And what I was going to say is, all the people that I see saying this stuff, they're all people who have never listened to a full episode of Joe Rogan. They even admit to it. They're like, I don't listen to him. I never would. He's just misinformation. It's like, okay, well, where are you coming up with this then? Because you just said you never listened to him. So why are you judging him and speaking as though you're an expert on his material? But again, folks, I've said it already a couple times. This is the world we live in. People just take a talking point from places like CNN, which we're going to talk about a lot later, and they just roll with it. And they don't care to do any research. They don't care to actually listen to Joe themselves. So we're all pulling for you, Joe. And I know you'll never hear this or listen to this, but just in general, the sentiment is all of us out here in alternative/independent/social media, we're cheering him on because he represents free speech. He truly does. He has folks on from all different sides of an argument. Like I said, he had Sanjay Gupta on from CNN. Made Sanjay look pretty bad, and it'll probably be tough to get anybody to come back on there from that network or who shares similar beliefs or runs with the same narrative that Sanjay runs with. But Joe wasn't mean to him. He was very cordial. They had a good intellectual exchange, a good back and forth. He showed Sanjay some studies that Sanjay wasn't even aware of, which is a little bit alarming when you're the chief medical correspondent for a network and you're the one everyone's listening to. Again, even though Joe has a much larger listenership. Joe had on someone who is now on President Biden's vaccine council or something like that, I believe. He's had on Dr. Peter Hotez, who's a very pro-vaccine doctor who he had on at the beginning of the pandemic. They just cherry pick different episodes to make him look bad. But when you look at everything, Joe talks to everybody. And that's why we love him. And when I say we, I mean all of us in the podcast world, the YouTube world, social media world. That's what we should all aspire to be. And he will say on the show when he's wrong, and they'll look stuff up in real time. When have you ever seen that happen on Fox News or MSNBC or CNN, any of the cable news networks? Never. Never. When have you ever seen anybody admit that they're wrong on any of those networks? Never. So that's why we appreciate Joe Rogan. Great segue. Whoopi Goldberg recently said on The View that essentially the Holocaust was not about race. And obviously got a ton of backlash for it. And more interestingly, though, it sparked this kind of discourse, this open dialogue on social media and sort of across the internet about that topic. Like, was it about race? What is race? What does race mean? And it's been really interesting to see people's different perspectives. Essentially, Whoopi's perspective, and I'll play the clip so you guys can hear it or see it if you're watching, but Whoopi's perspective is that it's not about race because it was essentially two white groups, the Nazis and the Jews. However, of course, Hitler's goal was to create a master race, and he saw the Jews as an inferior race. And in fact, there has been genetic evidence to show that the Jewish people are genetically distinct as a race. Studies released, I think, like back in 2012 have shown that. And it's odd that Whoopi would have that perspective, especially about the Jewish people, because she chose to give herself a Jewish last name. Goldberger is not her real last name. Her last name is Johnson. Her name is Karen Johnson. She's a real Karen. But anyway, I digress. She said that basically racism to her, or things being about race, have to involve essentially different skin colors. That's what she believes to be race as a black person in America. And I kind of understand it. from that perspective, of course, here in America, that has been the large narrative regarding race. But guess what? There's a whole world out there, and there have been oppressed peoples of all kinds of races. And ultimately, race is a social construct for the most part. It's a word that we created to describe groups of people based on all kinds of characteristics. Could be cultural, could be appearance, could be all sorts of things. And this is based on Merriam-Webster's definition of race. So Hitler's goal was to create this master Aryan race, and it wasn't just Jews that they killed. It was the disabled. It was people they considered dull or sickly or infirmed, people that they believed shouldn't pass on their genetic material, right? So it was essentially a eugenics program. They also went for black people. So it was sort of everyone, but especially the Jews, got to go because we're creating this master Aryan race. So it was 100% about race. And Whoopi Goldberg caught a lot of crap for it. So I'll go ahead and play this. And you guys can, if you haven't seen it yet, you can judge for yourself and see what you think. But this is what she said on The View.
To do this, then let's be truthful about it, because the Holocaust isn't about race.
On Monday's show, the host of ABC's The View inaccurately claimed the Holocaust was not related to race.
It's not about race. It's not about race.
What is it about?
Because it's about man's inhumanity to man. That's what it's...
So she said essentially it's not about race, it's just about people being mean to one another. Again, because it's two white groups, according to her. Now, she has been suspended from The View by ABC president, I forget her name, for 2 weeks for her, quote, insensitive comments. And she has since gone on several different shows and really hasn't taken it back or really apologized. She just keeps saying that essentially you need to understand her perspective as a black person in America. This is why she thinks it's not about race, but she understands where everyone else is coming from. So I think that, hold on one sec. Had to drink some delicious water there. Stay hydrated, everybody. Shout out to water. Thank you. I think that in some capacity, this line of thinking, at least in America, is rooted in this sort of new critical theory-based idea, specifically surrounding critical race theory, you know, this whole postmodern suite of thinking that essentially says that race is much more than just one group hating another racial group for their racial identity, or racism rather, is that. There has to be a power dynamic involved, and essentially it boils down to black people can't be racist to white people, but white people can be racist to black people, and so on and so forth, which of course I think is preposterous. I think any group, any race that mistreats another race because they are that race is being racist. This is the original definition. This is how it's known globally and how it's been known in other societies all across the world, and that's why, of course, the Holocaust was about race. However, again, this is the modern ideas espoused, especially in America, based on these critical theories rooted in postmodernism and ultimately from Marxism. It's that race is not just one race treating another race poorly. It's because of a power dynamic. Racism is when the more powerful race oppresses and mistreats the less powerful race, quote unquote. Now, I think that's inherently racist to assume, because you're automatically saying that black people are the less privileged, less powerful, whatever you want to call it, race. I think that that is a weird assumption to make, and it kind of falls in, for me, into the same category as like the soft bigotry of low expectations, where you have people on the left, white people on the left, who have grown up affluent or an upper middle class, saying things like black people can't get IDs to vote as easily because they have trouble using the internet to get IDs, or don't know how to get to the DMV, or whatever it may be. Just these wrong assumptions that white people make about black people.
Voter ID laws?
Yeah, they're usually pretty racist and they're bad.
I think voter ID laws are a way to perpetuate racism.
Would you go as far as say those laws are racist?
For sure.
Do you think it suppresses the African American vote?
Definitely.
Tell us how.
Because they're less likely to have state IDs.
Minority voters are less likely to have the kinds of IDs that have been described or required.
These type of people don't live in areas with easy access to DMVs or other places where they can get identification.
You can always get IDs you do over the internet. Does that also make it difficult for black people in particular?
Yeah, you have to have access to the internet. You have to be able to pay an internet service provider for certain fees.
Do you think that's harder for black people to go online?
Well, I feel like they don't have the knowledge of how it works.
A lot of people have smartphones, but you might not have data.
For most of the communities, they don't really know what is out there just because they're not aware or they're not informed.
I also think there's a repression of black voting with how if you're a convicted felon, you're not allowed to vote and everything. And when you look at swing states like Florida, that's a huge population of the African Americans.
And they're not trying to be pernicious, but they are being racist because they're making assumptions that are terrible assumptions to make about this group. But again, it's sort of the same thing. If you're going to assume that black people can't be racist towards white people just because of the power dynamic, that is inherently racist because you're assuming that black people are less than. And I don't think that's a good way to think. I think that's a horrible way to think. So anyway, I don't want to go off on too much of a tangent, but that's what's been going on with Whoopi Goldberg. She's off for 2 weeks. Now, I don't believe she should have been suspended. Personally, I don't think she should be fired. Now she's threatening to quit, which who knows? We'll see what happens. As someone who is a proponent of free speech and doesn't believe in cancel culture and canceling people for their speech, I don't think she should have been suspended. I think that exactly what should have happened, and it should have stopped there. And that's the court of public opinion weighed in, and there was further discourse about it. And we, the people, the public, heard what she said, made our own judgments, our own decisions. She had to follow up and go on other shows and talk to other people about it. And that should have been that. All right. Now, you may disagree with me. You may think she needs to be suspended or even fired. But personally, that I find to be pretty hypocritical if I'm going to stand here and say Joe Rogan shouldn't be canceled for beliefs or ideas that they don't like, but Whoopi Goldberg should be canceled for saying things that we don't like. And it's not like she was denying the Holocaust or saying anything really horrible about a group. She just seemed to be a little confused about what race was, especially during that era, and the fact that the Holocaust was about race. So again, I don't think she should be canceled or suspended or any of that. And I think that the best response to bad ideas are good ideas. The best response to bad speech is better speech, more communication, more dialogue. So anyway, you guys feel free to weigh in the comments or wherever you're listening to this or watching this. Let me know what you think. But do you think the Holocaust was about race? And do you believe that Whoopi Goldberg should have been suspended for 2 weeks for her remarks? I'd be curious to hear because I've made a post on my social media on Instagram making a joke. It was a lighthearted thing, and it was prohibition wasn't about alcohol. It was a quote saying prohibition wasn't about alcohol, and then Whoopi Goldberg probably. It was just a joke, but then, of course, that sparked a debate beneath it where people are saying that they do or don't agree with her, and they can see where she's coming from, or they think she should be fired, or what have you. So it's a very interesting debate right now, and I'd be curious to hear you guys' thoughts. All right, moving on. Last thing I want to cover. There's so much stuff we could talk about, guys, but we're just going to have to spread it over a few shows until we're completely caught up on all the issues. There's the whole trucker convoy up in Canada. I've got friends up there. There's a convoy here in America now. Probably going to be collaborating with my friend Stilettos and Shotguns, who's been on the show before, and we're going to, I think, get some food together and different donations to take to the truckers here in America who are doing the same thing. But anyway, we'll have more information about that. I'm literally just planning that with her now. I think we're going to talk in the morning. I'm not going to cover this topic too in depth because, again, I think we'll cover that more in depth on the next show. But that is ongoing. Justin Trudeau has fled from Ottawa. He's called all of these truckers racist, bigot, horrible people, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, you look at the people and it's a bunch of, I mean, it's an amalgam of ethnicities and racial identities and skin colors, et cetera. And everybody's just uniting under the fact that not even they don't believe in the vaccines, just they don't believe in mandates. They don't believe in violations of their freedom. And Justin Trudeau, of course, is handling this in the worst way. I mean, truly not the way a leader handles things, But again, we'll get into that more tomorrow. I'm going to go into depth on that one. Last thing I have to talk about this because you guys know how much I haven't even drank any of this pre-workout. I keep like swirling the bottle and then putting it back down because I'm so busy talking. So let me take a sip of this. Again, this is Megawatt by Phorm. Shameless plug, firstform.com/hurt. If you want an amazing pre-workout, get Megawatt. Got proteins, all kinds of cool stuff there. I've been with Phorm for years. The only supplements I use. All right. CNN. It has been crazy watching what has happened with CNN over the past several weeks, several months. Okay, first off, gosh, I don't even know where to start with this. So CNN is now owned, or majority owned, I believe, by a company called Discover. And the CEO of that company said, and I believe I covered this in an episode a while back, but he said something like, we're going to bring real journalism back to CNN, essentially making a dig at the current journalists there, saying that there's going to be some big changes. And Jeff Zucker, the CEO of CNN, was going to be stepping down from that position sometime next year after the acquisition was completed. Something like that. I know there's something like that going on. However, in the interim, all kinds of stuff has been going on at CNN. So first off, their viewership and ratings have declined by something like 90%, which is just absurd. It's insane. Like, nobody is watching CNN, dude. Nobody. Wild. And they're trying to develop this CNN Plus app that's supposed to be more targeted towards younger, hipper, like millennials or whatever. And they're just having a bunch of the same old boring CNN anchors on there talking about boring stuff. It's just incredible. It's like they do not get it. They do not understand why they're getting the floor mopped with their asses by independent media. However, it was just announced that Jeff Zucker, the CEO of CNN, is stepping down. So this is big, okay? This is big. And it happened because basically it was discovered during the, I guess you would call it, discovery period with Chris Cuomo's attorney and the whole mess surrounding that, where Chris Cuomo is pursuing legal action against CNN after they let him go over all the issues with his brother, where he was assisting him in ways he shouldn't have, I guess, with his sexual assault allegations. Anyway, big mess, but apparently they exposed this information, or at least delivered an ultimatum to Zucker that he had to come out with this, that he, Jeff Zucker, is in a relationship with another executive over at CNN, and he's supposed to report it, but he didn't. So that's like the whole big deal. Apparently his open letter that he wrote regarding his resignation was that he's in this consensual relationship with a fellow, I believe she's a VP, an executive VP or something like that. And her name is, I think I wrote it down here, Allison Gullist. I may not be pronouncing that last name correctly, but her name is Allison Gullist. They're both divorced, I think. And so there's no like affair or anything resembling that, but it's a relationship in the workplace and he didn't report it. So to me, I was like, okay, well, that's not really a big deal. He's resigning over that. He's stepping down over that. It seems a little fishy. But when you dig a little more, and this gets pretty interesting, Allison Gullist, again, if I'm mispronouncing that, I'm sorry, was actually the communications director for Governor Andrew Cuomo previously, okay? So more just like CNN Cuomo interlocking, interweaving weirdness, all right? So she was the communications director for Governor Cuomo, probably before he was Governor Cuomo. I don't know if he was governor at that point, but she was that position for Andrew Cuomo, then came over to CNN under Zucker. And apparently Zucker got her the job there because they were having a romantic whatever. But of course, when you look at the fact that she's a former employee of Andrew Cuomo and Jeff Zucker is her whatever significant other, and Andrew Cuomo's brother, Chris Cuomo, was using CNN resources to help his brother in the sexual assault accusations. I'm sure his former communications director, who also was in a VP position over at CNN, had a role to play in that as well, helping out her former boss, Andrew Cuomo. So you guys got to remember, one thing that Jeff Zucker said was that he was not aware that Chris Cuomo was using CNN resources essentially to help his brother. Now, obviously, if his significant other, Allison Gullist or whatever, is Cuomo's former employee, and she knows about the fact that Chris Cuomo is using CNN resources to help his brother, then of course Jeff Zucker knew about it. So that's, I think, a little more getting at why he's stepping down, probably to mitigate any further damage getting wrapped up in this whole Cuomo disaster. So just to recap really quick here, I mean, it's been pretty phenomenal to behold over these past however many months. You got to take it pretty far back, guys. But Jeff Toobin was kind of the first one. And you remember he's a CNN guy. I think he's like an attorney or something like that does correspondence for CNN. But he was caught whacking off on a Zoom call back when everybody was doing everything through Zoom earlier in the pandemic. And he was only suspended and he got to come back. I believe he's currently at CNN again, which is just insane. So it started with him whacking off on a Zoom call. Next, Andrew Cuomo, governor of New York, implicated in all these sexual assault allegations, doing all this raunchy, weird, gross stuff, just a horrible pig of a man, okay? And then his brother, Chris Cuomo, sexually assaulting his former boss, right? Smacking her on the butt in front of her husband, and then helping his brother out using his CNN resources to try and get around his sexual assault allegations. So whacking off, sexual assault, and then there was another producer over at CNN, I can't remember his name, but he was caught with, I think, like a bunch of child porn, and he had to leave. And now we just had Jeff Zucker, who's stepping down for issues dealing with a relationship that he's having with a coworker. I mean, how can you have so much sexual misconduct within one company, especially one company that ironically claims to be this objective bastion of news and truth? And you guys know what I'm talking about, right? It's insane. And it's been wild to watch unfold. And then lastly, of course, you have Don Lemon, who sexually assaulted a bartender by like rubbing his finger on, I think his balls or something, and then rubbing it on the guy's face. That's still pending in court or whatever. So who knows what's going to happen with that? It's just crazy. It's like all the talent over there, quote, talent, I use that term loosely, has been wrapped up in some sort of sexually deviant violation of conduct. It's crazy, wild. And now the CEO stepping down. So I was listening to Breaking Points earlier with Crystal and Sagar, and Crystal, I believe, was saying that one thing that Jeff Zucker did was like really protect his people, his journalists. He really protected them and insulated them against people maybe on the board or what have you coming after them. So that protection's no longer there. And I'm sure a lot of people are really fearing for their jobs, especially to loop it back to the CEO of Discover or Discovery, I can't remember the name, the company that now is the major parent company of CNN, saying that they're going to get back to real journalism. I mean, CNN could be a completely different enterprise just in a few months at this point. It's wild. Wild and crazy. Crazy world we live in. All right, guys, I've been yapping for a while. I got to get this pre-workout down my face hole and get in the gym, get back in the swing of things after being sick and losing a bunch of weight. I'm a skinny little marathon running looking sucker. But just to recap here, Eric Garcetti thinks you can hold your breath when you take pictures and not wear a mask, and that's going to mitigate the spread of COVID. Ha ha ha. There was a huge brawl at Golden Corral over missing steak or lack of steak. Joe Rogan is getting attacked by from every direction, by the legacy mainstream media and a bunch of washed up artists and people who don't listen to his podcast for spreading misinformation, and that's not the case. And Spotify so far is standing fairly strong next to him, and that's an ongoing thing. Whoopi Goldberg said the Holocaust was not about race. Truckers are protesting in Canada in massive numbers. Justin Trudeau has fled like a little baby. We're covering more on that tomorrow. And lastly, CNN is just crumbling under the weight of its own corruption, and it is a beautiful sight to behold. And with that, my friends, I bid you farewell. Until next time, keep your minds free.